Rap About It with Mal Adams. Each week, Rap About It focuses on a key issue concerning American minorities. This series also explores current and topical news events in an effort to bring into sharper focus the implications of these events for the minority community. And now your host, Mal Adams.
Good day, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rap About It with Mal Adams. I'm your host, Mal Adams, and today we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Okinawa, Japan. He's a senior member of the Japan Black American expat community, as I call it. He's an educator and an author with nearly 60 years of experience in Japan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reginald Kearney. Doctor, welcome to the show.
I'm pleased to be here.
Okay. It's really an honor to have you. Sure, I've been wanting to do this for some time, but let's dive right in, shall we? You've had an incredible journey in Japan, spanning decades, as I mentioned. Let's talk about your beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born and raised, and how it was growing up there.
I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, but I was raised in Hackensack, New Jersey. I lived in Hackensack until I was 18. After graduating at the bottom of my class somewhere, I think in the class of 320, I was probably 300. And I decided to go into the Marine Corps. Okay. My motivation for going into the Marine Corps was because they said their advertisements, books about them, movies about them said that they were the greatest fighting force in the world. And I'd read too many stories about African Americans being brutalized by racist white people. And I thought that the Marine Corps would give me the skills and confidence to meet all comers. My second reason for going in the Marine Corps, which I could have gotten from any military service, was because I was interested in traveling. But I was particularly interested in traveling to Japan, even as a youngster. Growing up in Hackensack, sometimes when you went to the barber shop, I went to the barber shop, you heard men who had been in the military service and had been part of the occupation forces of Japan talking about the Japanese. And very often when they were discussing international events, they would say things like, the British, the Americans, they can't do to the Japanese what they did to other colonized peoples of color. And over the kitchen table, sometimes my father would talk about his experiences in the military. And he had an opportunity, I guess, to go to Saipan. And one of the things that he said, which impressed me back then, was that he never considered the Japanese to be his enemies because they were people of color like ourselves. And he used to say things like, we had no country, and basically democracy was. I remember arguing with him one time about when he was basically following that theme that we had no flag, and I was saying, haven't you read about Thomas Jefferson and the Constitution? And but this thing that he had said about the Japanese not being his enemy, he said it was a situation where the government had put him in a place where it was a matter of kill or be killed.
Yeah.
And one of the important things, it seems to me, about the conversations that I overheard in the barber shop was all of these people who had been to Japan talked about how great it was.
Hmm.
And so there was a conflict there between, my father saying, people of color, the Negro really had no place in America. And then, these people coming back basically singing the praises of Japan. And so that stuck with me. And with the Marine Corps, I had the opportunity to come to Okinawa. I came to Okinawa in 1958.
It's where you're currently residing, right?
Yes,
Hmm.
not too far from the base where I was stationed, actually straight down the street here.
Is that right? Okay.
And of course, I didn't know much about Japanese culture, but I was a student, and I found things that I really liked about being in Okinawa. I really attempted to extend my tour of duty. The Marine Corps said no. And because of that, I decided that I wanted to be able to go and travel, go where I wanted, stay for as long as I wanted, and essentially do what I wanted. But in order to do that, I knew that I believed that I needed a college education in order to become employable in East Asia. So I matriculated at Morgan State College, where my brother had gotten a track scholarship. Uh, he set a state record in the pole vault in New Jersey. I met some of his friends. Before that time, I used to think, to go to college, and these people going to college were brilliant. And then I met his friends, and I said, whoops, maybe I can get in here. So I was accepted.
I see.
But going to Morgan was, in my view, a fortuitous circumstance because the president at that time, Martin David Jenkins, he was something of an expert on talented African Americans, children. And he and many of the faculty encouraged people to go on to graduate school. I did well at Morgan. I overcame the problems I was having in high school, sort of, because the problem in the high school had been, too much socializing and not being serious about studying. I
That'll
became
make you
a little
number
more
300.
serious.
That'll make you number 300 and something,
Yeah, and yeah, I guess I was in love with this girl. I went to see her Monday to Friday.
Wow.
I'd come from school, drop my books on the kitchen table, catch a bus to go to Patterson, get on a train to go to Morwell, New Jersey to see this girl, Eleanor. And
Quite a journey.
hmm?
That was quite a journey. That was not a short distance, right?
No.
Yeah. You recall in our earlier discussions as we came to know each other, I told you I spent a little bit over a year in Hackensack. So
Yeah.
I actually became fond of the area coming from Nebraska. You guys have a whole different
Corn
thing.
country.
Absolutely, man. I'm just a country boy from Nebraska, man, but I got to Hackensack. That's a whole other story, but ended up starting my news business career in New York from Hackensack. But fond memories of my times there and the characters I met. We actually know some of the people that I met there.
And Hackensack was a good place to be raised. Yeah.
I would agree.
And I basically went to Morgan with the intent of getting a bachelor's degree and going back to East Asia. But like I said, the president and faculty were, saying if you have the ability, you ought to go on to graduate school. And they said, even if you look at it from a practical point of view, you come out of school with a bachelor's degree, you'll be in one category in terms of being able to make money, but come out with a master's. And so the professor who was in charge of the Fulbright program was very successful in getting Fulbrights for Morgan students. And I think at the time he had the record in terms of small schools getting numbers of Fulbright scholarships. So I thought about Japan and found out that you had to have about 5 years of Japanese, and I had none. So I went to Sri Lanka for a year. And after a year at the University of Sri Lanka, back then it was called Ceylon, I went to the University of Hawaii with the intent of studying any and everything about Japan. And for me, that was another fortuitous circumstance because the advisor, the professor who turned out to be my advisor, George Akita, he was a tremendous scholar, a student of particularly the Meiji period. So I had George Akita, Robert Sakai, and John Stephan. Those are my three main professors in terms of studying Japan.
These were all at the University of Hawaii.
What's that?
This was all at University of Hawaii.
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
Let me just ask you, what motivated you? You seemed pretty much committed to Japan early on. I mean, you talked about your discussions with your father, post-World War II experiences. Is that really where it started? You seem to pursue.
Well, I think it was the combination of my father plus the stories I heard from these men who had been in Japan. And, they basically focused, they talk about Japan in terms of international diplomacy and being able to stand up against white people. And I found a book in a library too. I don't remember the name of it, but what the book said was the ideal life is to have an American house, Chinese cooking, and a Japanese wife.
I knew where you were going with that. I've heard that too.
Must have read the same book.
Well, the obvious question now, I got to ask it. Was that accurate in your case?
Yes.
So far, so good. You love Chinese food.
Well, I did. But my favorite cuisine, of course, is Japanese.
Of course, I was being facetious.
Yeah. So, but until I got to Hawaii, yeah, Chinese was my favorite food.
Okay.
But in Hawaii, I was introduced to Japanese rice. I remember the restaurant too. My first Japanese lady friend took me to this restaurant, Wisteria. I don't even know if it's still there.
Wow.
And, you know, she ordered a meal and she took this, you know, white rice. And I said, wow, this is so much better than the rice, that I was used to eating. I mean, in the States, you see Uncle Ben's rice, from South Carolina.
Right.
Uh, and I just fell in love with eating, what is it? Oh, hikari, hikari nantoka. But anyway, I think it's from Akita Prefecture.
Gohan shuri, a type of Japanese rice. Yeah.
So,
Gome.
yeah. And, the Hawaii, I thought, was actually perhaps, other than being in Japan, the best place to become educated about Japan.
So you
Because,
have your master's degree there.
yes,
Okay. And what was that discipline in?
East Asian history.
East Asian history. Okay.
So it's basically Japan and China.
So you were just beginning your writings about Japan. You became prolific. You've as a published author and lots of papers in the pursuit of your academic achievements, dissertations, etc. That pretty much start either in your undergraduate or at Hawaii. You went from Hawaii to Kent State, is that correct, to get your PhD?
Yes. Well, I did write a seminar paper for Akita's seminar, and I titled it something like, what was it? The Negro-Japanese relationship, myth or reality. But when Akita read the paper, he said, I didn't know there was such a relationship,
You,
And
well, what were you referring to actually? The stories you heard from African American family and
no. This was, it was for a seminar paper, so it was based on research.
Okay, so
When I was in Hawaii, I remembered the conversation with my father. And, like I said, it was pretty much of the stuff that Malcolm X was saying in the 60s, I'd already heard from my father.
yeah.
Okay. And so, for me, the question was he the only Black man that thought like this, or were there others who thought like that? And the University of Hawaii didn't have a vast collection of Black newspapers, but they had enough for me to find articles, particularly about a man named Robert Obadiah Jordan. He started what was called the Ethiopian Pacific Movement. He began as one of these street corner orators. He had actually worked for 3 years on a Japanese ship for a Japanese shipping company. He was originally from Jamaica. He had been part of the Garvey movement. And, he came under, of course, he drew the interest of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And they had this big trial. And it was interesting too, because they had bugged his this hall that he used, and the records that were produced in evidence, they were so inaudible that they had an FBI serving as an interpreter of what was being said on his record.
So his records were recorded documents or evidence or something, or was it espionage part of the FBI?
The FBI had
Gathering intelligence on him through recording. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And
What time frame was this? Give me a year.
This was in 1930s and 40s.
Okay.
He went to jail, I think.
Was he New York based, East Coast America?
What's that?
Was he based in the East Coast in New York? Or?
New York.
Okay.
In Harlem.
Harlem, okay.
Yeah. And the New York Times, when they wrote him up, they called him the Harlem Hitler, the Jap stooge was the way they said it or wrote it. So they gave him lots of publicity, and eventually 10 years and I think it was $10,000 fine because they charged him with sedition because he was saying things like, don't fight for the Americans, welcome the Japanese with open arms, if they draft you, turn over your weapons to the Japanese. Matter of fact, I think he was saying something like there was a hand signal that they could give that was supposed to keep you from being executed.
Wow.
He had a story. There was no doubt about that.
That's interesting. No, I want to close a gap here. I failed to mention in detail in your introduction that I did mention you're a published author, but most of your materials related to African Americans and the relationship to Japan. In fact, what you're speaking of, I recall one of your publications, it was entitled African American Views of the Japanese, Solidarity or Sedition. That's what this is about, right?
Yes, that's much of what was in there because, but the Jordan represented a certain segment of the African American community, well, Negroes back then.
Yeah.
And for example, like I said, Jordan came out of the Garvey movement originally, but people like W.B. Du Bois and members of the NAACP, of course, they were inclined to call these people crackpots. What was it?
Is that around the Harlem Renaissance period with all the art?
The Harlem Renaissance is a little earlier.
Was it earlier?
They had Japanese who were very active regarding the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
Yeah. Matter of fact, in the book that I'm writing now, I have 4 individuals who came from Japan and basically embedded themselves in the African American community in terms of the people that they were close to. For example, in New York, Hikida Yasuichi. He actually lived in New Bedford Hills, which was a suburb. But he knew just about everybody who was worth knowing in terms of the leadership in the Black community. He knew Du Bois. He actually arranged for Du Bois to go to Japan in 1936. He knew, people who know about the Schomburg collection probably know about Arthur Ace Schomburg, who was a bibliophile.
He's got a facility in New York somewhere.
It's now part of the New York Public Library system.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember, I understand. I went there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know from his name before I went that he was African American. I was thinking it sounds like a Jewish name, Schomburg. But
African Americans have everybody's name.
Everybody's name. Yeah, we don't have our own.
When I was in the Marine Corps, when I was a brig guard, there was a Black fellow who was something of a headache named like Wachowski or something.
Okay.
You don't meet too many Black folks with Polish names.
So with regard to the African American views of the Japanese solidarity or sedition, that paper, your inspiration behind the book was an evolution of time talking with your dad and meeting people in the barbershop, and it grew into pursuing this particular theme in your academics. Yeah.
Correct. When I first went to Kent, my advisor, August Meyer, he related his, he said he was sort of suspicious of trying to take a seminar paper and turn it into a dissertation. He didn't think, usually that turned out too well. But he gave me permission to look for sources. And he said, if you find sources, then you may pursue it. And he went on a trip to, I don't know, someplace like Tahiti. And he met some Japanese professor who was an anthropologist. And I don't know what the Japanese professor said to him, but he seemed to come back with more of a more positive view of the possibility of doing a study that would be worthwhile. Yeah.
So how would you describe?
Hard to say.
Okay. How would you describe thematically that particular publication regarding the complexities of the relationship between the two marginalized groups, African Americans and Japanese? The themes were the solidarity, identity, and the quest for equality, some kind of similarity in that respect?
Well, it was more like like I said, in terms of the African Americans, that they looked at Japan. At one time they talked, and Japan gave them reasons to encourage the idea, but as the champions of the colored people. And it was particularly following the Russo-Japanese War, which occurred in 1904, 1905. W.E. Du Bois started writing about Japan during that time period. And from that time period, he didn't have anything negative to say about Japan. For example, when the First World War began, Du Bois wrote a rather controversial opinion piece where he said we should put aside our grievances about racial discrimination, lynchings, and stuff like that, and join with our fellow white Americans in defeating this evil. Okay, that's First World War. He didn't write anything like that in the Second World War. And I say, That's primarily because he believed, and he wrote, he believed it was a race war.
Mm.
You know,
Well, look, if you look back historically on how we as Americans or the American administration and military would refer to the Japanese using the J word,
yeah,
Japs, all of
yeah,
that. Anybody, even me as a young African American, come out of reading this history, I'm thinking, man, that was, I had concerns of my own about the Japanese identity, and of course, since I've been living here most of my life, I found that to be really false.
yeah,
So the media, the propaganda,
yeah. But
the
see,
states,
and
yeah.
the Japanese were interested in the African American experience long before it was a war. That,
For example, what would you?
well, you mentioned the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
During the Harlem Renaissance, you had Japanese who were going to Harlem to uh, visit with, hobnob with people like Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes went to Japan. Now, his his stay in Japan was very different from when Du Bois went to Japan. Du Bois went to Japan in 36, but Langston Hughes went to Japan in 1920s. But he got deported.
Why?
Well, because he had gone to Russia first,
Mhm.
and he made contact with communists. I forget the name of this communist fellow, but it was suggested that he go and meet some of the people in this. It was a, right now I can't remember the name of the theater, but there was a very progressive theater in Japan where, matter of fact, one of the directors of this theater was actually killed by you went to Skiji, the
Mhm.
Skiji Metropolitan Police. They tortured this man to death. That's
Wow.
how harsh they were on people
Have
who,
you written extensively about this? You mentioned Du Bois and Hughes and the relationship to Japan, and uh, is this in any of your publications?
oh, I did write about Du Bois going to Japan.
Uh,
Uh, Langston Hughes will be in this next book.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
How
But
do they?
you had people. Okay, I was going to tell you about some of these Japanese who were around in the 20s.
Mhm.
You had a man named Nakane Naka. Nakane, he actually, and these were some very bright people, you know.
Mhm.
Uh, Nakane first went to Canada. He met a British woman, married her. He was living in Canada. He was something of an entrepreneur, had a hotel and I think a restaurant. He was making money. Uh, I forget what happened, but the he basically abandons this woman, goes to no, he took her to Tacoma, Washington. His brother was the principal of a Japanese school in Tacoma, Washington. It's after he gets to Tacoma, Washington, that he leaves her in the kids that they had together. But he's gonna end up marrying this black woman named Pearl Sherrod.
Mm.
And he will become a mass leader in a black community. He he
In
was
Washington? In Washington?
what's that? No, he goes to Detroit. He's going to become a phenomenon. What's his name? A professor at Amherst had written a piece about him, but he referred to him more as he had an alias, Satokata Takahashi, and he claimed to be a former major in the Japanese Imperial Army.
Okay.
He also
True.
claimed to have connections with what was called the Black Dragon Society,
Yeah, I remember.
which one Alabama congressman called the most nefarious organization on the planet.
That time, probably
So,
so.
so Nakane, he was a character, but he had this organization of thousands. When so you have this fellow working, he had recruited a Filipino guy and also a Chinese fellow. I don't know much about the Chinese fellow, but the Filipino guy sometimes pretended to be Japanese. But they were basically saying, you know, the people of color, like Japan is a champion of colored peoples, and peoples must unite.
It's very interesting. You know, you're telling me these things, but to what extent do you think this knowledge is known by African Americans then
Well,
or even now? And in your writings, you're providing invaluable insights into the nuances of cultural exchange and the pursuit of social justice on a global scale. Are these books and documents available on Amazon?
well,
Published?
yeah, Japanese views or African American views of the Japanese is available.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And hopefully this next one, if I can find someone to publish it, uh, I'll write to a couple of publishers, and if they give me the runaround like people did when I first presented this manuscript, then I'll maybe self-publish.
Yeah.
I haven't done that
Tell me a
before.
little bit about what you're writing on if you don't want to.
What's that?
I don't want to spoil it, but tell me a little bit about what this book, current book that you're writing on, thematically is about.
Oh, this one, the core of it is about people. See, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, people had this vicarious relationship with Japan,
Mm-hmm.
because they weren't settling in Japan. But the core of this book is going to be the interviews that I conducted, and I'm going to use some that I got off of the social media sites, and write about people who have chosen to make Japan home.
Now let me just interject here. A little bit of self-serving, but you did interview me. Am I going to make the cut?
You mean, are you going to be in there?
Yeah. You don't have to answer that.
Yeah.
Pressure on you on global television. Because I'm gonna hold you to it.
You've been a long-term resident of Japan, so I guess you qualify.
I qualify, but you're my dai senpai, as we say in Japan. Your relationship far exceeds mine. I can claim 50 years.
Well, yeah,
But you got more than 6 decades from the military until now.
yeah, but you've been living in Japan for 50 years. I've gone back to the
40,
States.
47, yeah.
But the thing was that even when I was in this, after coming to Okinawa, whenever I went to the States, it was almost like, I guess, a yearning to get back.
Yeah, yeah.
But each time I came back, I think I had more knowledge than I had before. The period of the 60s was very exciting in Japan.
Yes,
I
it was.
went to demonstrations that were anti-government demonstrations. I've been tear gassed and
Wow.
the whole 9 yards.
My first impression coming in the mid 70s, 76, I had current memories at that time of the what you speak of, but the opposition to the building of Narita Airport.
Yeah.
Speaking about that, that's part and parcel of what you're talking about, right? That kind of
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Very active, very
Zen
activism. Yeah.
I mean,
Go
but
ahead.
you may not have known that the Black Panthers came to Japan that time period when I was at ICU.
Wow.
And they had this big meeting in Hibiya Park.
What?
And yeah.
I never heard of that.
And see, I remember from the newspaper that they said something to the effect that, yeah, you got, because they were organized.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you have a good organization, but you need to get some guns.
Thank you very much. Good advice.
Yeah. Excuse me a hot second.
Yes, sir. We'll pause here. So we'll pick up when you come back with your community in Japan. So we'll talk about that right after this commercial. We'll be right back. We're back to this edition of Wrap Out with Mal Adams, featuring our special guest, Dr. Reginald Kearney. And let us continue with some of your books and publications that you've written. I was particularly interested in your book, African American Views of the Japanese Solidarity or Sedition, which you talked about. It kind of delved into complex historical dynamics. Could you elaborate on its significance in understanding African American Japanese relationships? What conclusions can we draw from your research?
Well, the leading elites in the African American community although they sometimes talked about what Meyer used to call the slum shop African Americans, sometimes referred to them as the lunatic fringe.
Who are we talking about here?
What's that?
Who are we talking about here? Name some names. The lunatic fringe.
Oh, people like Jordan. Back then you had what was called the Temple of Islam, the Allah Temple of Islam, with Elijah Muhammad.
Elijah Muhammad, yeah, sure.
You had the Pacific movement of the Eastern world with a woman named Mittie Maud Gordon.
Oh,
You had what is it? Um, Moorish Science Temple, I think it was called. There were
big,
a
lot
lot of other of these kinds
of
of,
religious guys too, Father Divine and cats like that, you know.
well, I don't know, father, but they weren't pro-Japanese as far as I know. I
I
haven't
see.
found
Okay,
it.
other people. Okay.
Uh, so the these people who said things like I heard from my father, Du Bois and others would refer to as the lunatic fringe. Yeah. But you know, the Temple of Islam grew to be the Nation of Islam.
Sure. Yeah.
And I had started to talk about these individual Japanese who had embedded themselves in the Black community. Um, you had a man named Tajiri Seho.
Mm.
He's the one who helped the Nation of Islam to develop their uh, contacts to provide fish as a more healthy alternative to uh, food source. Then he went to Georgia and started helping Georgia farmers to um, that he wanted these black farmers in Georgia to produce soybeans to be turned into tofu. Uh,
Wow.
so uh, he was very active. He was a former oil man. He started a company, oil company in Japan. But he had four brothers. He turned the company over to one of his brothers, I guess the more responsible one, most responsible one. And then he left for San Francisco. And when he was in San Francisco, he didn't come with the intention of well, with any particular goal with respect to African Americans. But when he was in San Francisco, some of the Japanese told him, "Oh, you can't go to these black neighborhoods because they're dangerous." And he said, "Why?" He said, "I'm gonna go check it out."
Yeah.
He went and he said, what he found were hardworking people, and you know, he he said, you know, he decided then that he was going to dedicate his life to trying to help. One of the things that he said was, you know, when he first current came to America, he thought that all Americans were well off. And so the poverty that he saw in the black neighborhoods, you know, set him off. And he said he was going to dedicate his life to trying to help to the degree that he could.
Let me shift gears here and let's cross the water and come to your life in Japan. I did not mention in your academic experience that you've been an educator at the various prestigious universities in Japan, such as Oberlin University and Hitotsubashi University. How did that shape your understanding of cross-cultural education? Describe your students. I presume they were Japanese, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And,
Yeah.
and or other.
Um, well, I was only at Stotsubashi for one semester uh, through uh, I had a very good friend. Matter of fact, he was a victim of incident of road rage, which was
Mm.
Still, when I think about it, upsets me a lot because he was a very bright guy. But some truck driver was going the wrong way and was on a street, and Tsuji was on his bicycle, and he told the man, this is a one-way street. I ran him down.
No, come on.
Uh,
Where was this, in Tokyo?
huh?
Where
Yeah,
was
and what Kunita, not is it Kunitachi is where Sotsubashi University is.
No.
Yep.
So tell me about your
I
students
I
and
taught I
tell me about.
taught it. So the one semester at Stotsubashi, but I taught at Obiden, and also I taught at Kandagaigo Daigaku, which is in Chiba. With respect to students,
And what were you teaching them? And what was it?
I
How
was
were
teaching history and English.
I see.
Yeah. Of course, I get a chance to talk about African Americans, and
Well, that's what I was wondering. Was it
that's what my field of study. So,
right?
but the students were, for the most part, they're much easier to deal with than American students. I didn't mind American students trying, but some of them are just ridiculous. They want to tell you how to teach a course.
Oh man,
Yeah,
trust me.
I mean,
That's why I own school for the Adams International Academy. I create the curriculum and I just develop the teaching method, and we're
yeah,
happy campers.
and like I had this woman tell me I was a racist. This was one of the classes that I had for Maryland.
Oh wow.
Um, I mean, it was a woman who was in the Navy, and she could not write English. I mean, simple sentences. So I suggested that she go, I think they had a writing clinic, go get some help. So I'm going to class, she meets me in the parking lot, and she says, I think you're a racist. I said, what? I've marched with Martin Luther King, woman. But, so, yeah, I was upset. And, well, I think you're prejudiced against Spanish people. I said, oh, I don't even remember her name, but it didn't sound Spanish to me. And I
Okay.
said, oh, are you Spanish? I wasn't aware. Well, my grandparents were from Spain. I said, oh, well, I don't know anything about you or your grandparents. But but I said in class, I have people who are obviously Spanish, and I don't have a problem with any of them. You know, so you must be crazy. But it's like one time at Kent State, a young black fellow, and he was not doing anything, but he tried to tell me that in my classes I should give black students an opportunity to berate white students for but the years of subjugation or some such stuff. I said, oh, I don't know. Maybe I had some merit in a sociology class, but that's not what I'm teaching. And he was supposed to write a paper when he turned this thing in, my reaction was, and I told him, this paper has no beginning, no middle, and no end. Well, all I know how to write is, and he used the N word, you know.
Oh, wow.
I said, look, if you tell a white professor something like that and he buys it, that's between you and him. Don't talk nonsense to me. Where do you think I come from? You know,
Yeah. Right.
boy. And so, but I don't need you. Hey, no problem. No problem. Yeah. And then toward the end of the term, the character comes to my apartment with his wife and his babe wrapped in swaddling clothing,
Yeah.
the cop leave. And I had to tell him, I said, I gave you all the opportunity that I would have given any student, and you just weren't willing to do the work. So there's nothing I can do for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
But you don't get that kind of stuff from Japanese students. If they don't like you, they'll pack their bags and leave, Shoot. No, I never had it.
Let me ask you about another one of your publications, Reconcilable Differences, Issues in African American Japanese Relations. What key issues do you address in that, and how do they reflect on contemporary realities in Japan now?
Oh, this was I used to be active with the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies in Washington, D.C., the only African American think tank in the country. And the Joint Center and the Japanese Society in New York had brought people together, scholars. Russell was one among them. And
Dr. Russell here in Japan.
yeah.
Okay.
And this was post Nakasone, Kajiyama, and Watanabe's stupid remarks about Black people.
Yeah. I did a major piece on that for CNN.
Yeah, well, a lot of people were upset. And so they had this academic gathering, and they asked me to do the write-up. So that's what that was.
Let me see. That would have had to have been in the mid-'80s.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. My CNN years from 83 to 86, roughly. Those things occurred, and I certainly had to do the Nakasone piece. Just an aside, I followed him with the press corps to Washington, D.C., where he made a major speech. And then I suggested that he go to the Congressional Black Caucus, where he wanted to apologize for his remarks. Closed door meeting, no press in there but me. And he actually did the Japanese ojigi, bowed to them and apologized for saying such things, man. It was, of course, I had no video or anything, it didn't report it, but I
And my take on that was, it was largely because it was the Reagan administration.
Sure.
And they hear this stuff from these stupid Republicans.
Sure. Yeah, the Ron Yasu relationship, remember? Ronald Reagan and Yasuhiro Nakasone. It was known as they were bosom buddies, man, but I'm sure he inherited a lot of that. And the comments he made was not for publication. It was so overheard. He was speaking to some people in his village, as I recall. But
I think it was at a meeting of the Jiminto.
Okay. But he certainly regretted that. I rode the plane with him back to Japan. I interviewed him, covered him a lot. I actually been to his beso in Karuizawa. but I didn't think he was a bad man. He was a very shrewd, strong politician, man, and widely admired in Japan. Yeah. Well, listen, talk to me about your life in Japan. Then ultimately you came here and you've been living here now continually for how many years we're talking?
Not even sure. I have to start counting.
Calculating.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, at different times it was different. Okay. I said, when I came back in 68, I came back as a student at ICU, the International Christian University in Tokyo. But that was a time when I was, studying, but I was also socializing, and it was also a time when I was going to Zen doctrine gatherings. Matter of fact, one of the first young ladies that I met was from Chuo University, and she was a member of one of the factions, and she invited me to come, and talk to her group. They want to know about, kind of stuff that goes on in America and what have you. And I think I might have mentioned, that I had been active in the civil rights movement. Then in Sri Lanka, I had experience where I witnessed students being clubbed by police. Matter of fact, some cop wanted to shoot me. Well, I had a movie camera. My cousins had given me this movie camera. And, I thought I'd take pictures of the students as a strategy. They had Buddhist monks and young women at the head of their protest march. And so Buddhist monks and young women were some of the first to get cracked upside the head with these, they had these, I think, what they call baton, but it's a heavy stick, I think, made out of coconut.
We call them billy clubs.
No. The baton is longer than a billy club.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, they didn't have arms, the weapons. They used those like kendo, right? The Bushido sport.
Well, these had a big heavy knot on the end of it.
Right.
And then they use wick-ear shields. But the students, they messed up one cop that they caught. Oh, they beat that man. I think scrambled his brains just about.
Well, let me ask you what I was alluding to earlier as a senior member of the Japan Black American expat community, as I described you. What unique perspectives do you bring to discussions surrounding race, identity, and belonging in Japan to either your Japanese counterparts or your African American young people who have come after you? I find myself doing that a lot. What's your perspective on that? How do you describe Japan and life here? And people want to, increasingly, I find many African Americans are finding life as an expat as desirable over current happenings and lifestyle in Japan. What's your take on that, and how do you approach that and discuss that?
Well, in terms of my own perspective, my attitude has always been, well, when I was younger, if Japanese did something that I didn't like, if I thought they were as racist as some people want you to believe, I'd have packed my bags and gone home. But my experience in Japan has been like 99% positive. I've met very good people. I've Had some great friends. Matter of fact, just yesterday, I have a student. I think he's turned 20 now, but he's been my student since he was in middle school. And his mother and father, he considers me like another grandfather.
Mhm.
His mother and father, matter of fact, his father asked me yesterday, you know, how's his English? Does he have an accent? I said, well, a New Jersey accent. I mean, the boy, he's been a very good student. And every class that I taught, teaching for the city of Ginowan, he's taken some classes, he's taken more than once. And this is ever since he was a middle school student.
Mhm.
And the father, mother, good people. He speaks Russian, he speaks Chinese, he speaks English. And you couldn't tell that he wasn't a native speaker. You hear,
But people like that are few and far between, are they not, though? In your experience, the majority of you use Japanese a lot to communicate. How much would you say um, you are able to communicate in English to people that you haven't taught or haven't met? It's kind of difficult, isn't it? Rare, right?
um, well, I've met some who are very good, and then some maybe not as good. Okay, for example, the two women that I just had this last term, uh, both of them. Now, one is an interpreter, so her understanding of English is a lot better than the other one. But both of them, what the other one told me the other day was, uh, "Oh yeah, I tape your lessons, and I go home and I practice."
That's
See,
not bad.
they do the kind of stuff that I tell students they ought to do.
Exactly,
That's the
exactly.
difference.
I'm laughing because I have recommended, I do my classes online thanks to COVID. It's much easier than renting my facility and having students come all day. Now I can sit here and teach online, but I do record it and share the video, post it undisclosed on my YouTube channel, and anybody can download it and review it and study, the corrections I make, and it's quite useful in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, as we wrap it up, I want to know what you think is the future of African American Japanese relations and what steps can be taken towards a greater understanding and collaboration for young African Americans who see us talking or have other friends who have come over here to live. Talk about that. Would you recommend it? How would you describe the benefits of it? And also talk about international marriage. Your wife is Japanese, and I've got children of mixed race, four of them that grew up here. Talk about those two things, if you will, please.
Would I recommend coming to Japan?
Yeah, well, how would you do? Yeah, if you
Yeah,
were.
of course. I don't recommend coming to Japan as some kind of escape. I believe that if you come to Japan, it should be because there's something about Japan that you find of interest. But even more than something of interest, that first you do your homework, in my belief, that you study about Japan. So don't you, so when you come, you know, for example, one time Meyer came to the apartment for lunch, right? And
Really? You're a professor.
yeah,
Wow. Okay.
and he, he took a chopstick, right? And scratching his head.
Okay. Okay. Wrong. Yeah.
Things like that you don't want to do.
Yes.
That you should come understanding that you want to learn about Japan. Now, personally, I think, sure, it's okay to have African American friends. But I don't think you have to be a part of a Black community in Japan. Um,
Well, you know, as a former president emeritus of the Japan Afro-American Friendship Association, JAFA, which is now undergoing a reorganization. Years ago, back in the 80s, when I first came here with CBS and then CNN, we did have a Black community, and it was a cultural exchange function, and we were able to impart our culture on the interested Japanese community, and vice versa. We learned more about them. But I said all that to say that was ostensibly why we gathered. But beyond that, there ain't no ghetto in Japan. So you gotta
yeah,
establish a life in the
right.
village you may be
I
living
used
in.
to be I used to be in Jaffa, so
Right. I
I
remember
don't
that.
see
Quite a
anything
few of
wrong
you.
with
Yeah.
Jaffa because it was supposed to be an interchange.
Right.
Matter of fact, I gave a talk. They asked me to give a talk at Jaffa, right? And this young African American fellow, he came. I can't remember what they had asked me to talk about, but uh, this young fellow came up and he said, "Oh, Dr. Kearney, I enjoyed your talk, but oh, you don't understand that there's this spiritual connection between African Americans and Africa." And I said, "Oh,
African Americans and Africans
in Africa,
in Africa.
okay." But I said, and there were some Africans in the organization at the time,
Yeah.
and they understood what I was trying to get across better than this young fellow. And I taught African American history, and I talked about Africa. I mean, I took courses in African history with Meyer and then with Irene Diggs. Now, Irene Diggs, she was very close to Du Bois, and you could not say anything that was disparaging towards Du Bois because you'd be in your case. But she was a very good anthropologist, and you know, uh, but anyway, I told the young man, I said, if there's this strong spiritual connection as you suggest, then where should you be? You're here in Japan just like I am. And then I said, how about some of the uh, you say there's a spiritual connection, but how about this issue of what do you call it? Uh, it's basically female circumcision.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, would you have your daughter, your sister undergoing that kind of operation? Oh no, I couldn't go for that. Then you're not African.
Uh,
It's part of the culture. If you don't understand the culture. I used to have a class where there was a woman, she was married to a Nigerian fellow. And I mean, the way she reacted in class when I talked about it, it was almost cathartic for her because she said her husband would have friends over like every night, brothers from Africa, from Nigeria. And she said, I have to do homework. I have to take care of our son. And he told her, he said, woman, if you embarrass me in front of my friends, I will take my boy and go to Nigeria and you'll never see him.
trust me. I know, I've heard that from cats.
They do not play. And if a father of one of these young scholars in a village in Africa said, boy, come home, he's going home. Uh,
Right, right.
so yeah, you have to learn the culture. And I think that if you're coming to Japan, you must be willing to study.
Let me end with this. It's and get your thoughts. You're, of course, academician and in the education business. I've become an entrepreneur since leaving the networks as a foreign correspondent or international broadcast journalist. And what I found is all of the things I learned about Japan were easily transferable into an enterprise. I have a small company with different divisions. Green Tea Online, the current one now that's got me busy is Totown Tours. And I've got, coincidentally, at the time of this interview, I have a group of 8 African Americans, a family of 8 cousins and brothers and sisters, grown, 60 years old average, with some young 20-year-old people coming in a matter of 1 week. And I'm preparing for that. But this is my second year since after COVID, and it's a booming business. People are wanting to come, finding out about Japan. The interest has seemed to be exploding. There are Black travel groups that contact me and want to come. So this next group coming in, and I specialize the tour. I bring them into the heart of Japan here in Takigawa, Shizuoka, where I live, and tell them, yeah, you could go to Kyoto, but I'd only spend half a day there because you're going to spend 2 days trying to see all these iconic things. Come and let me show you around Takigawa, the countryside of Japan. And we do the green tea processing factory. We sit and do zazen meditation at the local temple here, take them to City Hall, meet the mayor, and then go to Mount Fuji and do the ropeway, go to Ieyasu Tokugawa's shrine and burial grounds there. And within 2 days, right here in my village, I can show them more than they'd be able to get through some tour thing online that would cost them 5 times the price. You know what I'm saying? So, but as I escort them and guide them, I'm happy to share the culture, knowledge, information, and introduce them to real things Japan, and people with whom they can interact. And it's my most rewarding enterprise right now. And I was just wondering about your thoughts. Would you recruit or have an invitation for people who would want to come? And are there any assurances you can give them? You did mention do your homework, of course, understand the culture. But if they came, how would you say that they would enjoy life in Japan as an expat African American here? Any final words along those lines to share?
Oh, I think that's a very good introduction to Japan. And it's the kind of thing that will create an interest among some people, especially younger people. I think, I don't know how many, well, I have no idea how many older people would want to pack up and come to a foreign country
No, I'm
where,
primarily talking about young people who are looking.
okay, but for younger people, I think it's a good introduction.
Sure.
And I mean, really, if I had my way, I'd have brought out all of my sons and brother and sisters. Now, my brother's been here. Actually, Yoshiharu, Tetsuro, and my brother have been to Japan many times. But about 3 years ago, Tetsuro came with his oldest daughter. And when we're back in the States in September, Yosh says he wants to bring both his daughter and his son to Japan. So, yeah, I mean,
Well,
Okinawa is my paradise. You know, every day is a holiday.
You're living in one of the best parts of Japan.
Amen.
Life is good, Okinawa.
It's actually better than good.
Listen, I've been here longer than I ever lived in the United States, right? Came here at the age of 27. I'm going on 75. Okay, so I'm a happy camper. What can
You're
I
still
tell
a young boy.
and you don't know how accurate that is because I'm living in a country that has one of the longest life expectancies of any place on the planet. So
Hey,
yeah,
Okinawa is among.
I ain't going nowhere soon. Doctor, let me just ask you before we end. I had a friend of my big brother who was at Nebraska University. He spent time with us. His last name was spelled the same as yours, but pronounced Kearney. You pronounce yours Kearney, is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
but it's Irish and both are used. Some people say
Yeah, I've
Kearney.
heard both, and I didn't know. I just wanted to make sure I got your pronunciation right. So
There was like a Kearney, Nebraska, and
exactly, I'm from Nebraska. We know Kearney. That's where I got that sound from originally. But we also had another friend named Kearney.
and then there's a town in New Jersey, Kearney.
But yours is Kearney.
Yeah, that's the way.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Pronounced it.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We're going to end it here. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us today on Wrap About It with Mal Adams. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I hope I'd invite you to come back again and let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much for coming and hanging out with us. And that's going to wrap it up, ladies and gentlemen, for this edition of Wrap About It with Mal Adams. Stay tuned for more enlightening conversations, and don't forget to keep spreading love and positivity wherever you go. Peace out for now. Thank you, and good day. Sayonara.
Rap About It with Mal Adams. Each week, Rap About It focuses on a key issue concerning American minorities. This series also explores current and topical news events in an effort to bring into sharper focus the implications of these events for the minority community.